Hi y'all, welcome to my shop. Today we're going to turn this little guy. It's a fun little Chickadee ornament. I think this guy may wind up in this year's ornament exchange at my club. I didn't come up with this idea all by myself, but I copied it from an article by Chuck Ruby out of More Woodturning Magazine. If you're not familiar with that magazine, you might check it out online. Let's get started. I'm using a piece of Bradford pear, 2.5 inch square, 4.5 inches long. I'm going to go ahead and mark centers, put this between the centers and round it off and put a tenon on it. We've done that enough times. I'm not going to show all the detail on that. Okay, I marked the tenon. I'm using a 1/4 inch parting tool. I'll part down to that line. Okay, I made a parallel tenon because that's what my Chuck desires. I make the tenon before I completely size and round this off 100% in case it gets below the diameter my jaws can safely hold. So now I'm going to finish taking this down to 2 inches. Okay, taking the tenon we just made, we're going to mount this in our Chuck. The next step is we need to face off the bottom before we drill a hole in it. So I'm going to use the tool rest I cut on center, put into it. Okay. Now we're going to drill a hole 1/4 inch deep using about a 1.5 inch Forstner bit, and use whatever size you've got that to accommodate your tools. Actually, this is a 1 3/8, but it'll do fine. Now slow the speed down to about 600. Hold on to the Chuck drill. Tighten up just a little bit. Cutting into end grain is tough. I'm just going to eyeball the 1/4 inch. I think that's probably pretty close. And that's right on the money. Okay. Now we're going to hollow out the inside, take away some waste wood with additional drill bits. The first thing I do is I mark an area 1 5/8 inch deep, and then I mark another line 2 1/8 inch deep. I'm going to drill to this first one with, in my case, a 1 1/8 inch Forstner bit, and you can see it. I use this line as kind of a double check or to set the tape for how deep I'm going to drill it. So let's go ahead and mount that. Again, keeping the speed slow. About 500 or so. Clear the chips. By using a smaller drill bit, it's going to leave a little step in there for us to put the plug on the bottom. And to hollow out a little bit deeper to this line, I'm going to use a 1/2 inch Forstner bit. Instead of using tape, I'm just going to mark this with a felt tip pen. Put the marking on top where I can see it. Okay. We're going to drill down to this mark here. Now this is an optional step, but again, to remove a little more weight, because you want your final ornament be as light as possible. I'm going to use a spindle rough and gouge to get rid of just that little bit of wood transition between the 1/2 inch hole and the 1 and 1/8 inch hole. But this is, you know, that's been a little anal, but don't worry about it if you don't want to go to that step. With a flute about 10 o'clock, go straight in and come on over. Now I'm going to mark where the end of the ornament is, which is at 2.5 inches. And then I'm going to measure a line up from the bottom 3/4 of an inch, which is going to be where the body changes shape. Now, using a spindle gouge, I'm going to transition from here down to the end, not bringing it quite to this sharp edge, but back just a little bit, and just kind of rounding the body of the chickadee over a little bit. First, we're going to remove some of the wood on the end. And then we're going to simply bring this back. I think that'll do it. Our next cut, we're going to take a parting cut just to the left of the end of the ornament, 2.5 inches, and we're going to either use a 1/4 inch parting tool, or if you like, you can use something a little bit wider, but we want that part to be about 1/2 inch because we've got to have room to maneuver in there as we shape the head. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch parting tool. We leapfrog each parting cut so it doesn't bind. And we want to get that down to about 3/4 of an inch. You can size that with calipers or a wrench of your choice. Get it close before you stick a wrench in there. Okay. Even it up all the way across. That 3/4 is about going to be the shape of the top, so that gives us something to aim toward and gives us room to maneuver our tool. So we're going to use, you can use a spindle gouge, you can use a skew, but we're going to make that cut from this transition down to the top. First, let's remove the wood near the end. That's where the bulk of the wood removal is coming from. I just keep moving a little further back with each cut. A little further back with each cut. A little further back with each cut. Bring it down. Leave as much mass here as possible while we're shaping. Now we're simply going to part this off and set it aside, and we'll worry about sanding it later. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and sand some of this off the lathe, and we'll leave the last bit of sanding later, but we're going to sand it and then I'll come back. Now we're going to part this off at the 2.5 inch mark and set it aside, and then we're going to make a jam chuck out of the remaining waste block. Now to measure this, there's a couple of ways. We can either measure the inside diameter here. That shows you, where it's going to go. Or you can grab the drill you used and measure it either way. let's go ahead and mark that 1/4 of an inch. Pretty close to 1/4. Actually, an easy way to measure that is simply use that. Being careful not to touch this end, of course. That gives us a pretty good idea. And I'm going to taper it slightly toward that mark. Pretty close. Now all I got to do is just straighten out the back a little bit. And we want a very snug fit to hold this, be a jam chuck, but we don't want it so tight that we'll run the risk of splitting, of course, our bird bottom. I believe that's on the money. Handle here. Appears to be running true. So now we're simply going to round over the top using a spindle roughing gouge. Sorry, just a 3/8 inch spindle gouge. Just to clean up that last little bit, taking very, very light, gentle cuts. Okay, now all we got to do is sand that end up a little bit, and we're going to go ahead and take this opportunity to drill a little hole in it. We can go ahead and do that now. You can either do that by putting a small tiny drill bit in the Jacob's chuck, or you can actually use a pin vise, which is what I'm going to do. And I'm just going to make a little starter hole with my birdcage awl. And I'm using a little tiny hand pin vise that'll hold these small drill bits. Drill bits this small sometimes won't hold in your drill chuck, so this works for me. Okay, and then just twist it a little bit. I'm going to use a screw eye. I've got a bunch of them, brass or silver. I think I'll use a silver. If you don't have screw eyes, you can make a hanger following an excellent article I've got a link to Rick Morris did using a wire, which is just a really, really nice approach if you don't have the screw eyes. Okay. Alright. Now all I've got to do is I'm going to sand this off and then remove it, and we'll go to the next step. Okay, before we remove this from the jam chuck, now's the best opportunity to drill the 2 holes we've got to drill for the beak and the tail. Now what I like to do is kind of line up the grain if there's a pattern, and line that up with an opening in the chuck jaws, between the 2 chuck jaws, because that allows me to align the tail on one end 180 degrees off from the beak on the other. So the first thing we're going to mark, and I'm going to use this this awl, is we're going to come up right on that division line 3/4 of an inch up, and that's going to be the tail. And I'm just going to put a small hole in there. Now we're going to turn it 180 degrees and lining, make sure I got it just right, because the grain may not line up on the other end. That's why I'm using this. We're going to come out 1 3/4 inches from the bottom. Come out 1 3/4. That's right there. It looks to be about centered. Maybe I need to use a pencil to kind of line that up a little bit, or a straight edge. Let's do that. Let's mark a straight edge out from the middle. Okay, so I'm just a hair off. Again, using the awl, and I'm angling this in just from a little bit. Now, when we drill, first thing we're going to drill is we're going to drill the 1/8 inch hole for the bottom. To get, you want an angle of 25 degrees. So the way to get that angle, I'll get it right here in a minute. This will help us figure out the exact angle right here. Here's the 25 degrees, and that's from this direction. It doesn't have to be perfect, but having a little template like this gives you a pretty good idea of that angle. And who knows whether it's 25 or 30. Now I'm going to start drilling straight up, and then I'm going to drop it a little bit. Whoa, I better get this drill bit centered here. Okay. And I'm using a brad point bit to make it easy to keep that thing centered. So I'm going to start the hole here, and then we're going to twist it down to what I think is 25 degrees. There we go. Now on the other side, we're going to switch to a 1/4 inch bit, holding it either using a spindle lock, but I'm just going to hold it with my left hand and kind of come in there. Alright, now you can either finish this with friction polish on the lathe, or you can take it off and use a rattle can spray, lacquer, acrylic Krylon, or shellac. I think I'm going to go ahead and use some shellac friction finish, and then we'll come back and start working on the beak and the tail. Before we get to making the tail and the beak, we've got to part this tenon off, because that's going to become the base that sits in this recess, and we know it fits. All we've got to do is come behind here and part it off with a thin parting tool. Alright, now we've got a plug. The first thing we're going to turn is a 1/4 inch beak. If you've got a collet chuck, that makes a very nice way to put in a dowel. You could use a 1/4 inch dowel and then very little work to it, or you can use a little larger dowel, but a collet chuck, it holds well. I know many of y'all don't have a collet chuck, so let me show you another simple way to do it. We're simply going to take the block that's already on here, the scrap block. We're going to drill a hole appropriate for the dowel we're using, and then glue it in there. Now, before I glue the dowel in, I put a little hole that we're going to use to center it. And I'll just use that drill bit so I don't have to move it out. So we'll center it with a drill bit after I put a little glue in here and tap it in. Okay, I'm back from lunch. I went to lunch while the glue dried. We're going to mark, first thing we're going to do is we're going to mark a 1 1/4 inch mark right here. This is going to be the end that goes in, so from here we're going to measure 3/4 of an inch, right about there. But we're probably going to have to remark that, because basically I'm going to take this down to 1/4 of an inch. This measures 1/4 of an inch, so I'm just going to eyeball it and get it pretty close to that. So let's get started. I think I'm going to do a little bit of a part here to make it a little easier for us to guide in on where we're going. And I'm just going to use this 3/8 inch spindle gouge. We're going to have to remark that, but that's okay. Now, probably ought to go toward the headstock. Alright, now I'm going to part that off. Let's just let it go. We're going to go ahead and take that off. Okay. Not so bad. And I'm going to sand that down a little bit and we'll be good to go. I don't claim to be any expert on using a scroll saw, but I've put the tail feathers on a 1/4 inch thick, 1 inch, we're cutting it 1 inch by 1 inch. Pattern will be on the handout you can download from my blog site. So, and I didn't get too crazy about marking it out precisely. I use a felt tip pen, so it's going to be good enough. Okay, I've cut 2 or 3 of these tail feathers because I'm going to make some more of these. But first thing I want to do is I'm going to mark, using my awl, where I'm going to drill the hole. Just a little bit. Then I'm going to go ahead and, using a brad point drill bit, we're going to come in there. Just go down in there a little ways. Now, for the dowel, 1/8 inch dowel, you can buy 1/8 inch dowels. What I find is even cheaper is picking up some of these, a package of 12 inch skewers from a dollar store or Big Lots or someplace. They're very inexpensive and you can use them for a number of different projects. And you're going to cut off a piece, maybe an inch or so, maybe 3/4 of an inch. And you can either cut it on a little saw or you can just cut it with some pliers like this. And yeah, it'll squeeze the end a little bit, but it won't matter. We're going to take a little pocket knife or sandpaper and squeeze that and get that to fit down in here. Okay, now I'm going to put just a little bit of glue on here and put that into the tail feather. And we're just going to leave this till later. We're going to come back. I'm going to paint these and the beak before I put them on the bird. Just a couple of tricks on sizing these skewers if they're a little bit too large is just, you know, check it up in your drill and put a little sandpaper on it and you can take it down easily like that. The other technique for matching things to a hole, if you use a plumber's reamer, these are very handy. You can actually, you know, slightly enlarge the hole that you're going to use just a little bit. They're readily available in a 1/2 inch. You can find them in 5/8, which I find to be a little more useful, and they're great for putting handles to coffee scoops or in Christmas tree ornaments and other things where you're joining small items into a hole, finials and such. I want to get started early this year doing Christmas tree ornaments, so I hope I've inspired you all to get down to your shop and make one. If you like the video, please share it and click on the like button. Till next time.